Israeli settlers have started the occupation, and it's been going on since. Many years before it, Israeli forces have been attacking native Palestinians. This includes Muslims, Christians, and all Palestinians in general. This doesn't have to be just Palestinian Muslims. So, even recently, they have been using militant tactics during Eid and Ramadan at Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. It's a very holy place in Islam, so it's really disrespectful and disgusting for militant forces to start attacking followers of Islam over there. I feel like it's time for the world to hear more about this. Every day Palestinians lose their homes and they have to flee to different countries. My family was originally from Palestine. I'm a third-generation Palestinian, and they had to go to Jordan because of the attacks from Palestine, or from Israel to Palestine. When my grandpa was like 4 years old, his family had to leave his land, and everybody was together, and my great-grandmother realized that she needed to get the sewing machine because her children's clothes have been ripped up, when she realized that my grandfather was behind a rock and crying, and they didn't even realize that he wasn't there with them. So if that day my great-grandma didn't go back for that sewing machine, I wouldn't even have been here. And I think that's a big thing to know, that my grandfather would have not been, he might have not been with us from that. Lately, there have been so there's a very popular reporter named Shireen Abu Akleh. She was wearing a press vest and helmet, and she was assassinated. And some witnesses have said that this was a very prestigious shot, and it ended up killing her. She even had a funeral that was like crashed by these forces, and that's very disrespectful, and they couldn't even mourn in peace because of it. Just this month, they've killed 5 children, and one of the children, he was like 16, same age as I am.
For shame.
He had left a note saying, if I died, don't be sad, bury me where there's a lot of kids around so I won't be lonely, and remember me, to not forget him. I want everybody to remember that there's lots of kids and people that lose their lives every day because of this. It's not fair to them if we stay silent, because they took their lives on their native land. Thank you. There's also other speakers, I'm so sorry, that are going to be speaking up here after me. So thank you so much for listening and taking your time out of the day to come out. I really appreciate all of you.
Hello? Okay. I'm Zena. My family left Palestine in 1948 to go to Jordan because it was being occupied by Israel, and they had to stay in Jordan because of that. They could not go back to Palestine. My own uncle, who was the same age as me, 15 years old, he was being targeted by Israeli forces. He didn't see his family for months, and he was absolutely scared for his life. So many people, so many young people should not have to fear for their lives for just existing. But this is the reality for many Palestinian people. This protest is for spreading awareness as Americans for the liberation of the Palestinian people and to commemorate the lives lost. Israeli forces are directly harming innocent Palestinians, and the United States have a strong partnership with Israel, further funding Israeli official forces. Israeli imperialism is killing Palestinians and taking Palestinian land. This is not a conflict. This is an occupation, and this is a genocide. And we must do whatever we can to help the people of Palestine. This is for the liberation of the Palestinian people. This is for freedom.
Free Palestine.
Thank you.
Free Palestine.
All right. We want to thank the organizers for putting this together. Thank you, folks, very much. It's very important. And thank you to all the people who are here. Every one of you is so important here in Central Illinois. This is critical that we be here and stand up for the Palestinian people, okay? And the lead speaker mentioned, you know, what people say, oh, what's going on? What does that have to do with Central Illinois, with Bloomington, Illinois, with Peoria, with Decatur, with Galesburg, with all the other cities? I'm telling you, it has everything to do with us, okay? From Palestine to Peoria and Bloomington is a direct connection. And that's one of those things is Caterpillar, okay? That is the top BDS American industrial giant that is complicit in war crimes, in the home demolitions, in constructing settler places, constructing settler colonies in the West Bank, all right? That is directly, people here are responsible for Caterpillar and their policies. They have been making blood money off the occupation, not for years, but for decades. For decades. They know what they're doing. They know they're involved with gross human rights violations, with war criminal activities, and they do nothing. They hide from it. They will never be accountable with their current management system. All right? So there is a direct connection between what we can do right here in Central Illinois and how it affects Palestine. One of those things that we have to do is help to stop the money flowing from the United States to Tel Aviv, to Israel. Because if we can stop the money, the occupation will end. Israel is not so-called Israel, that apartheid state. It is an apartheid state. It does not have legitimacy. It is a settler colony that doesn't deserve to exist as a normal, legitimate state, okay? If we stop the money flowing to Tel Aviv, the occupation is doomed. It will end. Israel cannot fund it on their own. They cannot supply the troops and the equipment and the Caterpillar tractors on their own. It is up to every one of us to contact your Congress people, to contact every elected official that we send to Washington to say, enough! Stop the money! Stop the U.S. funding that's almost $4 billion a year! And that doesn't include the guaranteed loans. We send them billions each year. It is because of the United States that the occupation exists. It's because of us. It's because of me and you and everyone who pays their taxes, but who doesn't speak up enough. We have the responsibility to stop it. The Palestinians are doing their share. Every day they are dying. Every day they are suffering. Every day they are losing their homes. Every day they are oppressed. And this is because of the apartheid Israelis, who are backed up 100% by Joe Biden, by Schumer, by Pelosi, by all these other hardcore Democrat and, of course, Republican Zionists. If we can stop the money, we will stop the occupation. And I tell you, it's going to happen. The American public, by every known poll, is for the Palestinians. The American public, the majority, are for a free Palestine. The American public understands what's going on. We need to re-emphasize that, and we need to change our leadership because the leadership are Zionists. Joe Biden is a Zionist. He should be, and I condemn him and his administration. Last May in Gaza, all those people murdered by American weapons. Innocent people. Joe Biden didn't stop it. Joe Biden supported it. He said, we have to let this go. He could have stopped it from the minute it started, but he chose to let it go. He murdered 66 children. He murdered over 200 people. They destroyed tens of thousands of homes. They destroyed Gaza even more over 2014. We have got to stop this. Joe Biden is no different than Trump. I have been to Palestine. It was the honor of my life to march with Palestinians in occupied Bethlehem, in occupied Jerusalem. We peacefully marched against the Israeli fascist guard, well armed. We went right up into their faces before they unleashed rubber bullets and tear gas into women and children and seniors who had peacefully assembled. They didn't care. They didn't care if they died. They wanted us to die. America will not stand for this any longer. Join us here in Bloomington. Join us here throughout Central Illinois saying BDS on Caterpillar, boycott, divest, and sanction on Caterpillar, boycott, divest, and sanction on all corporations that are complicit in the occupation. Stop the blood money. Stop supporting fascist Zionism. Shukran, and God bless the Palestinian people. May they forgive us our complicity. We promise here to do everything we can in our lives, in our daily lives, to be with them. Solidarity. Thank you.
Check. Well, thank you, Lawrence, for that, and thank you to the comrades that helped organize this and brought us here today. So I have some prepared remarks. Let's see. Oh no, it's good. I think I'm good. I think I'm good. Thank you, sir. I think I throw this cough. Okay. So, thank you to everybody that came out today. It's a beautiful day, right? It's a beautiful day to be together, but we know that we're here because this is not a beautiful world in whole, unfortunately. Like some of the comrades that spoke earlier alluded to, Palestinians live in an open-air prison, often without clean water, under the constant threat of displacement, of the razing of their homes, of imprisonment, and of straight-up murder. So I want to kind of connect some of the things that we've been talking about today and think about how we can actually build a BDS movement, right? Because that's already happening in the world. How do we join that here, right? And I'm sure folks are privy to what happens when we try to build BDS movements. So that's why I think I'm going to hit on some organizational notes, because I think it's through building organizations that we're able to resist the repressive forces of the state and capital that will surely come upon us whenever we support Palestine, and whenever we build any movements that actually threaten the status quo and threaten the balance of class forces. So, but I want to say first and foremost, I'm a socialist and I'm an abolitionist because I mean, claiming socialism and claiming to be an abolitionist is the very beginning, right? Because then the challenge is to live up to that standard, right? And to constantly build comradeship with other folks that are in that shared project, that push each other to be accountable and have responsibility and commitment. So, but as a socialist and as an abolitionist, given the state of Israeli apartheid amid the U.S. imperialist project, I don't believe that there is such a thing as Palestinian self-determination without a complete transformation of this world. So the fight is not just for a Palestinian state. Given the tangle of factors of colonialism and capitalism, the work is not just for Palestine and against Israel, but against a world that could even deliver these bleak two-state solutions that would memorialize the apartheid and genocide which founds the Israeli state and Zionist project. Most immediately, we're here to raise our voices and bodies together in solidarity with the Palestinian people in their long struggle against Zionism, against Israel, and against the apartheid state, for their sovereignty and for their self-determination. And this fight has been in process since the formation of Israel, right? Which Israel has risen along with the rise of U.S. imperialism since the end of World War II. And this has been enmeshed in the U.S. settler colonial project, receiving billions of dollars in aid and weapons, like Lawrence alluded to, that have murdered thousands of Palestinians, taken away homes, clean water, right? The conditions for a flourishing life. Most recently, we saw the assassination and murder of Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh in a direct and targeted attack by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. Despite initial and continued reports from U.S. and Israeli media and state forces, she was shot and killed, murdered by IDF bullets, shot by actual human beings, right? Not just like bullets that somehow found their way, if we read the news reports, right? Somehow the bullets just happened to land inside of her, killing her, right? Like they weren't. So, but despite these initial and continued reports, we have found out, right, from the Palestinian Authority and from eyewitnesses that this was an intentional and directed attack against somebody that the IDF knows has been a journalist that has been fighting Zionism and for Palestinian solidarity for decades.
Shocker.
But I want to also draw a line, a continuity between the logic of what happened with the IDF and what recently happened in Uvalde. Because there is a continuity, and these fights are connected. Though solidarity always looks different, and we must be attentive, there's a similar controlling logic, where the IDF has been able to claim, despite eyewitnesses' accounts, that Shireen was not killed by their own bullets. And in Uvalde, we see a similar battle for the truth, right? Where the police are making all sorts of claims about the conditions under which they did not go in for an hour to save these 19 kids that were murdered, right? They sat outside the room in which the shooter was and did not go in to save these kids. The similar logic here is that the IDF thinks that whatever they say is the truth, right? Just like what Nixon said. When the president does it, that means it is not illegal. Well, for the IDF, the similar logic, just like the U.S. police forces. If the police does it, then it's not illegal. If the IDF does it, then it's not illegal. If the IDF says that something happened a certain way, then that's the way it happened. And so, right, we get all locked up in these battles for truth, though, right? On social media, people are always like, oh, trying to fight these little battles for truth. And I understand why we do that, but this is not going to be won in the media. This is not going to be won in schools, even, or from one-to-one conversations and good points alone. This is going to be won through and with collective power in the Palestinian streets and in our streets. This is going to be won when we come together and demand a different world. Not that we vote for politicians to make that world for us, but if we vote for politicians, it's because we are actively taking up the work of politics in our everyday lives, of holding them accountable, not just voting one day every couple of years and then going back to our lives. That is not politics. That is not how we change the world, by voting for other people to do our work. Politics is our work, and that's why we're here today, because we know that. Our challenge is to always locate ourselves in a here and now. What are our conditions? How do we support Palestine from Bloomington Normal? How do we connect the fight for Palestinian self-determination with the fight against gun violence in the U.S., with reproductive justice, with income inequality, with a whole range of fights? It is in and through broad-based movements for socialism and for abolition of the world that these transformations will become possible. The dominant logic of neoliberalism is to say that we need to fight these independently in channeled, narrow manners, right? Only fight to defend healthcare. Only fight in a very narrow way to fight for abortion. But the socialist project, the abolitionist project, says that when we fight for reproductive justice, healthcare, and all these together, they all become possible. And it becomes even more dire when we talk about Palestine, because in the U.S., even supporting Palestine and naming the truth that Israel is an apartheid nation state committing genocide and ethnic cleansing against the Palestinian people will get you called an anti-Semite, as if there was only one genocide ever in the history of the world. And of course, we condemn, right, the Holocaust against the Jewish people and against all the people that were part of that genocide in World War II. We condemn that, of course. But we also know that there are genocides and ethnic cleansings happening all over the world today. And this is connected to our own land, right? Because it should sound familiar, what happened in Israel, unfortunately, where they came in and entered a land and emptied it of the native people and then called it their own country. That should sound familiar, even though we aren't taught that in U.S. schools. But that is the story of the United States of America. It ain't the one that they quote from our founding fathers, but it's the truth. Against this, we must take up all of these fights, and I know that it's a lot, but there is no other choice. We cannot fight these except all together. And, to quote my boy Lenin, we need to be all-sided. And I think he anticipated in some ways intersectionality in saying we should be all-sided, because we cannot separate these fights. We must be present and attentive for the connections and how we build solidarity to confront these huge systems, because the systems are so successful because they're so tangled up in each other, and they got us fighting things on a very small level instead of promoting wide systemic solutions. So how do we do this? I don't know. I don't have a schematic. That's why socialism and abolition is more about who comes together rather than providing a schematic about what is necessarily going to happen.
Power where there's people.
Power wherever there is people. Indeed. And so to do this, we must form and join organizations. Around here, to what extent they exist, we join existing organizations. But from my assessment, unfortunately, and I'm sure many folks know the state of the left in this area, we need to build new organizations. We must rebuild the left. If we don't have organizations trying to fight these fights, we must make those organizations, because we will not be able to sustain the power of the state and the police in the long term if we don't organize collectively. Unfortunately, comrades, the fact that the police are not here today is a sign of our weakness. I'm sorry, but if we don't tell each other the truth, then we're not going to get anywhere. When we start posing a threat to them, the police will be here, because they know that the police are always wherever the balance of class forces are being threatened. And that's why we're here, because we want to build a movement to where we can actually change things. ACAB forever. Abolish the police. So, we need to build organizations. And this is our work, not specialized work for politicians who don't see themselves as the end game. Sorry, yeah, messed that up. The point is, the power comes from us, not politicians. And are there some decent people that are running for office? Sure. But this system is not fundamentally a place where change happens. Study history, you're not going to see much change happening within the system. You're going to find a pacification. But what we need to do is come together and to form organizations and recognize that we need to demand a better world and that we change the world together. I'm going to end with a quote from Black Panther George Jackson, and he wrote this in 1970, right before his assassination in prison. And I think this really speaks to what we need to do in order to come together and make commitments about our everyday lives that are connected to transforming the world. He said, "Settle your quarrels. Come together. Understand the reality of our situation. Understand that fascism is already here." 1970 he said that. Understand that fascism is already here. That people are already dying who could be saved. That generations more will die or live poor, butchered, half lives if you fail to act. Do what must be done. Discover your humanity and your love in revolution. Pass on the torch. Join us. Give up your life to the people. So I want folks to leave here today and think about how you can commit your life to the people. Solidarity forever.
off if there's anybody else who wanted to say absolutely anything from this.
I didn't exactly come here to speak. So, first and foremost, solidarity with Palestine, the Palestinian people who are being colonized, ongoing. Trying to be respectful of certain boycotts. So I'm not sure what all I can say, except that